They saw a black man in a cheap suit and saw a conviction. They didn't see the man who signed their paychecks. Judge Arthur Halloway and Prosecutor Gavin Reed ran the 4th District Court like their own private kingdom, trading verdicts for favors and crushing anyone who didn't fit their image of a proper citizen. When Marcus Vance stood before them, silent and observant, they smirked, thinking they had another easy target for their prison quota. But they made a fatal error. They didn't check the new state appointments. They didn't know that the defendant in handcuffs wasn't just innocent. He was the newly appointed chairman of the Judicial Conduct Committee, and he was there to burn their corrupt empire to the ground. This is the story of the trap that snapped back. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B had been broken since the Reagan administration, or at least that's how it felt. The air was thick, smelling of floor wax, stale coffee, and the desperate sweat of the accused. Judge Arthur P. Halloway sat on the bench, his robe slightly unzipped at the top to let his neck breathe. He was a man of heavy jowls and icy blue eyes that had long ago lost the capacity for empathy. To Halloway, the courtroom wasn't a place of justice, it was a processing plant. He checked his Rolex, a gift from a friend in commercial real estate, and scowled. It was 11:15 a.m. He wanted to be at the country club by one more, sir. Boss. Next case, Halloway grunted, not even looking up from his docket. The state calls the case of State versus Marcus Vance, the bailiff announced, his voice bored and droning. Docket number 4498. Charges: aggravated assault on a peace officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Marcus Vance was led in. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a grey suit that looked a size too small, likely provided by a public defender's closet. His hands were cuffed in front of him. He walked with a calm, almost unnerving, steady gait. He didn't look at the floor. He looked directly at the bench. Judge Halloway finally looked up. He saw a black man in his mid-40s with a shaved head and a stoic expression. Halloway's lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disdain he had perfected over 30 years on the bench. In Halloway's mind, the verdict was already written. The man looked difficult. He looked like the type who questioned authority. "Mr. Vance," Halloway said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Do you have counsel, or are we wasting the taxpayers' money on a public defender today?" A young woman, barely out of law school, stepped forward. This was Sarah Jenkins, a public defender who was drowning in a caseload of 200 clients. She looked exhausted. "I'm representing Mr. Vance, Your Honor. We enter a plea of not guilty." "Of course you do," Halloway muttered, loud enough for the court reporter to hear, though she knew better than to type it. Sitting at the prosecution table was Gavin Reed. Reed was the district attorney's golden boy, sleek hair, a tailored Italian suit that cost more than Sarah Jenkins made in a month, and a smile that looked like a shark sensing blood. Reed was running for state attorney next year, and he needed tough-on-crime stats. He needed convictions. "Your Honor," Reed stood up, buttoning his jacket. "The state requests bail be denied. The defendant attacked a uniformed officer during a routine traffic stop. He is a danger to the community and a flight risk. We have reason to believe he has no ties to this district." Sarah Jenkins shot up. "Objection. Your Honor, Mr. Vance has no prior criminal record. The assault described in the police report was Mr. Vance raising his hands to shield his face when Officer Miller initiated physical contact. He is a homeowner in this county." Halloway slammed his gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Ms. Jenkins, do not testify for your client. I have the police report right here. It says your client lunged aggressively. In my courtroom, The word of a veteran officer like Sergeant Miller holds weight. I'm setting bail at $500,000. A gasp rippled through the few people in the gallery. $500,000 for a traffic stop altercation with no injuries? It was unheard of. It was unconstitutional. Marcus Vance didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He simply adjusted his glasses and stared at Gavin Reed, then shifted his gaze to Judge Holloway. It wasn't a glare of anger. It was the look of a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope. "Your Honor," Sarah stammered, "that is excessive. My client cannot pay." "Then he stays in county," Holloway snapped. "Next case." As the bailiff grabbed Marcus's arm to pull him away, Marcus spoke for the first time. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and controlled. "For the record, Your Honor," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto the judge's nameplate. "Are you stating that my lack of prior record is irrelevant to your bail determination?" Holloway turned red. He wasn't used to defendants speaking in complete sentences, let alone questioning his logic. "One more word, Mr. Vance, and I'll hold you in contempt. Get him out of here." As Marcus was led through the side door back to the holding cells, he caught the eye of Prosecutor Reed. Reed winked at him. A cocky, arrogant wink that said, "I own you." Marcus just blinked slowly. He wasn't worried about the bail. He wasn't worried about the jail. He was memorizing faces. 2 hours later, the courtroom was empty. The lunch recess had begun. Judge Holloway retreated to his chambers, a spacious office, lined with mahogany bookshelves, filled with law books he hadn't opened in a decade. He poured himself a glass of scotch, no ice, and loosened his tie. There was a knock at the private entrance, and Gavin Reed walked in without waiting for an answer. This was their ritual. They called it strategy coordination. The law called it ex parte communication, and it was strictly illegal. $500,000, Arthur?" Reed laughed, pouring himself a drink from the judge's decanter. "You're trying to bury this guy deep." "He annoyed me," Holloway grunted, sinking into his leather chair. "Did you see the way he looked at me? Like he was grading my performance. Besides, you said you needed this one fast-tracked. What's the rush?" Reed sat on the edge of the heavy desk, swinging a polished loafer. "It's not just the stats. You know, the construction project on 4th and Main, the new luxury condos, the ones backed by the terrified investors from Chicago?" "Exactly," Reed said. "The land dispute. There's a holdout owner on the adjacent lot. A shell company called Vanguard Holdings owns the alleyway access. We need that access for the cranes. If we don't get it, the project stalls. I did some digging. The registered agent for Vanguard Holdings is a Marcus Vance." Holloway's eyebrows shot up. "The guy we just sent down." "The very same," Reed smirked. "He's not just a random traffic stop. Sergeant Miller pulled him over because I asked him to keep an eye out for the car. We need Vance desperate. We need him to plead out. If he's facing 5 years for assault, he'll sign over that alleyway easement for a reduced sentence and probation. We get the land. The condos go up. The property values in the district skyrocket. And your investments in the construction firm yield a nice 20% return." Holloway swirled his scotch, a greedy light entering his eyes. "So it's a shakedown." "It's urban development, Arthur," Reed corrected him smoothly. "We're cleaning up the city. Vance is just debris." "He claimed he was a homeowner," Holloway recalled. "I thought he was lying." "He probably owns a rundown shack." Reed waved a hand dismissively. "He doesn't look like money. He looks like labor. Even if he owns the lot, he doesn't have the cash to fight us. The public defender, Jenkins, she'll tell him to take the deal. She's too overworked to fight a trial." Holloway chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You're a wicked bastard, Gavin. That's why I like you. But be careful. That public defender is green, but she's annoying. Don't let her find out about the land interest." "She won't," Reed assured him. "And even if she does, who's she going to tell? You? You're the judge." They both laughed. It was the laughter of men who believed they were untouchable gods in a small world. Meanwhile, in the holding cell of the county jail, Marcus Vance sat on a metal bench. The cell smelled of urine and bleach. Most men would be pacing, screaming, or crying. Marcus was perfectly still. He closed his eyes and mentally replayed the conversation in the courtroom. He had anticipated the bias, but the severity of the bail confirmed something darker. $500K bail for a Class C felony with no priors. That wasn't just racism, that was tactical. They wanted him in a cage. The heavy steel door clanged open. A guard threw a sandwich wrapped in plastic onto the bench. "Eat up, Vance. Your lawyer is here." Sarah Jenkins walked in. She looked even more frazzled than before. She sat on the stool on the other side of the plexiglass divider. "Okay, Mr. Vance," she said, opening a thick file. "I'm going to be honest. It looks bad. Judge Holloway has it out for you. I've seen him do this before, but never this aggressively on a first offense. But I have some weird news." Marcus leaned forward. "Go on." "I tried to look up your financial records to file a motion for bail reduction based on indigency," Sarah said, frowning at her notes. "But every time I run your social security number, the system gives me an error code. Level 5 access required." "I've never seen that before. Who are you, Mr. Vance?" Marcus smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile that completely transformed his face. "Ms. Jenkins, do you believe in justice?" I try to," she stammered. "That's why I do this job. But today, it feels like a losing battle." "It's only a losing battle if you're fighting with the weapons they expect you to use," Marcus said softly. "I need you to do something for me. Don't file for bail reduction. Let me stay in here for the weekend." "What? Why? It's dangerous in here." "I need to see how the deputies treat the inmates on the night shift," Marcus said enigmatically. "And Monday morning, when the trial date is set, I want you to file a motion for discovery. Specifically, I want the dash cam footage from Sergeant Miller's cruiser, and I want the GPS logs of his patrol unit for the 2 hours prior to my arrest." "Miller claims the camera was malfunctioning," Sarah sighed. "That's convenient." "File the motion anyway," Marcus commanded. "And one more thing. Go to the law library. Look up State Statute 19B, subsection 4, regarding judicial conflicts of interest in land disputes." Sarah's eyes widened. "Land disputes? This is an assault case." "Is it?" Marcus whispered. "Trust me, Sarah. By Monday, you're going to be the most dangerous lawyer in this building. But you have to trust me. Can you do that?" Sarah looked at the man in the orange jumpsuit. There was a power radiating from him that didn't fit the setting. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a hunter, waiting in a blind. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll file the motion." "Good," Marcus nodded. "Now, go home. Rest. The show starts on Monday." As Sarah left, Marcus reached into his jumpsuit. He had managed to smuggle a small, flat device, a digital voice recorder roughly the size of a stick of gum, into the cell, taped to the inside of his thigh. He wasn't supposed to have it, but he knew the intake procedures of this jail were lax for non-violent offenders. He pressed the playback button. He hadn't recorded the judge's chambers. He wasn't that close. But he had recorded the intake officer bragging to another deputy about Reed's special guest and how they needed to rough him up a bit tonight so he takes the plea. Marcus clicked the device off. Strike one, he thought. Saturday night in county jail was a different world. The administrative staff went home, the lights dimmed to a sickly yellow hum, and the night crew took over. These were the deputies who didn't fit in polite society, the ones who enjoyed the power a little too much. Marcus Vance lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't slept. He was listening. 3 cells down, a young kid named Leo, probably no older than 19, was crying. He had been brought in for possession of marijuana, a charge that usually warranted a ticket, but in Holloway's district, it meant a weekend stay to teach him a lesson. "Shut up, kid!" a voice boomed from the corridor. It was Deputy Griggs, a man with a neck thick as a tree stump and a reputation for breaking fingers accidentally during transport. Marcus sat up slowly. He checked the position of the small recorder taped to his leg. It was running. Griggs and another deputy, a nervous-looking rookie named Stanton, stopped in front of Marcus's cell. Griggs twirled a baton, the heavy rubber slapping against his palm. Thwack, thwack. "So this is the cop fighter," Griggs sneered, unlocking the cell door. "Reed sent word, said you might need an attitude adjustment before Monday." The door slid open. Marcus stood up. He didn't retreat to the corner. He stood in the center of the cell, hands loosely at his sides. "Deputy Griggs," Marcus said, his voice level. "And Deputy Stanton, badge numbers 492 and 511, respectively." Griggs paused, confused. "You memorized our badges? You think that's going to save you?" "I'm merely establishing a record," Marcus said. "Before you proceed, I want you to consider something. There are cameras in the hallway. I know you've turned them off. That's a violation of Department of Corrections Policy 8.4. But sound carries. You think you're a lawyer now?" Griggs stepped inside, looming over Marcus. "Lawyers can't help you in here. There's no witnesses." Griggs swung the baton. It wasn't a kill shot. It was a gut shot, meant to wind him, to make him crumple. Marcus moved with surprising efficiency. He didn't block it. He sidestepped, letting the baton hit the metal bunk frame with a deafening clang. In the same motion, Marcus stepped into Griggs's personal space, his face inches from the deputy's. "If you touch me," Marcus whispered, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen, "you will lose your pension. You will lose your badge. And you will spend the next 10 years in a cell just like this one, surrounded by the men you've tormented. Is Gavin Reed worth that? Does he pay you enough to destroy your life?" Griggs froze. It wasn't a physical threat. It was the absolute certainty in Marcus's eyes. This wasn't the desperation of a criminal. It was the authority of a superior. For a split second, Griggs felt like he was the one in handcuffs. "What is this guy?" Stanton whispered from the doorway, looking spooked. "Griggs, let's go. The sergeant is coming down soon for rounds. We can't leave marks." Griggs glared at Marcus, breathing heavily. The psychological wall Marcus had erected was impenetrable. "You're lucky, Vance. Monday comes fast." They slammed the cell door and locked it. Marcus let out a breath he had been holding. He sat back down. He reached into his pocket and clicked the recorder off, then immediately back on to start a new file. Attempted assault. Conspiracy to intimidate a witness. Solicitor. Gavin Reed. The rest of the weekend was a test of endurance. Marcus watched as other inmates were denied water. He watched as medical requests were ignored. He saw the systemic rot of the 4th District court system from the inside out. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was gathering evidence for the biggest judicial review the state had ever seen. Meanwhile, at the Rolling Hills Country Club, Judge Holloway was having a very different weekend. He sat on the terrace overlooking the 18th hole, a cigar in one hand and a gin tonic in the other. Across from him sat Gavin Reed and a man named Mr. Sterling, the developer for the luxury condos. "So, the alleyway issue," Sterling said, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was a nervous man who hated getting his hands dirty. We're behind schedule, Arthur. The investors are asking questions. Relax, Bob, Halloway laughed, ash falling onto his polo shirt. The owner of the obstruction is currently enjoying the hospitality of our county jail. Monday morning, he'll be begging to sign that deed just to get out on probation. You're sure? Sterling asked. What if he fights? He has a public defender, Reed chimed in, popping an olive into his mouth. Sarah Jenkins. She's a sweet girl, but she's drowning. She'll advise him to plead. We offer him time served and a suspended sentence in exchange for the property rights. It's a win-win. He goes free, you get your land, and Arthur here gets his return. It feels risky, Sterling muttered. Risk is for poor people, Halloway declared, signaling the waiter for another round. We are the law, Bob. In District 4, reality is what I say it is. They clinked glasses, unaware that 5 miles away, a young public defender was staring at a computer screen in the basement of the law library, her mouth hanging open in shock. Sarah Jenkins hadn't slept. Her apartment was covered in sticky notes and printouts. Marcus had told her to look up State Statute 19B. It was an obscure law, rarely cited, regarding judicial disclosure in real estate transactions involving municipal interests. It essentially stated that if a judge or prosecutor had a financial interest in a case, however indirect, they had to recuse themselves immediately. Failure to do so wasn't just a mistrial, it was a felony. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was what she found when she dug into the shell companies. Marcus had told her to look into Vanguard Holdings, the company that owned the land Marcus was supposedly protecting. When she finally cracked the corporate veil, she expected to see Marcus's name. She did. But not just Marcus Vance. The document listed the registered agent as Marcus E. Vance, trustee for the State Judicial Oversight Committee. Sarah froze. She reread the line. The Judicial Oversight Committee? That was the body that policed judges. That was the internal affairs of the court system. If Marcus Vance was a trustee for them, he wasn't a random guy. He was a high-ranking official. She frantically typed his name into the State Bar Association database. Nothing. She tried the federal database. There it was. Marcus Eleazar Vance, former federal prosecutor, chief ethics officer for the state Supreme Court, current chairman of the Special Task Force on Judicial Corruption. Sarah pushed her chair back, gasping for air. Her client wasn't a mechanic or a laborer. He was the chairman, the traffic stop, the assault. It was all a setup, but not by the police. Marcus had set himself up. He had dangled himself as bait to see if Halloway and Reed would bite. He wanted to see if they would violate his rights, if they would try to extort him for the land, if they would deny him bail. And they had done all of it. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. They jailed the guy who signs their licenses. She realized why Marcus had kept quiet. He needed them to commit fully to the corruption. If he had revealed who he was on Friday, they would have backpedaled, apologized, and swept it under the rug. But by keeping him in jail over the weekend, by setting the exorbitant bail, by trying to extort the land, they had dug their own graves. And now, Sarah Jenkins, the overworked public defender, was the one holding the shovel. Monday morning arrived with a torrential downpour. Thunder rattled the windows of the courthouse, setting a grim, cinematic tone for the proceedings. Courtroom 4B was packed. Word had gotten out that Gavin Reed was personally handling a violent assault case, and the press was there, hungry for a tough-on-crime soundbite for the evening news. Judge Halloway took the bench, looking hungover. He banged the gavel. Recalling Case 4492, State v. Vance, Halloway grunted. Is the defense ready? Marcus was brought in. He looked tired. He hadn't shaved in 3 days, but his eyes were bright, sharp, and dangerous. He wore the same grey suit. He sat down next to Sarah. "Did you find it?" Marcus whispered, not looking at her. "I found everything," Sarah whispered back, her hands trembling as she arranged her papers. You're the chairman." "Not yet," Marcus corrected her softly. "Right now, I'm just a defendant. Let them hang themselves, Sarah. Follow the script." Gavin Reed stood up, preening for the cameras. "Your Honor," Reed began, his voice smooth. "Over the weekend, my office has reviewed the severity of the defendant's actions. However, in the interest of judicial economy and mercy, the state is willing to offer a plea deal." "Go on," Holloway said, feigning interest. "If Mr. Vance pleads guilty to a reduced charge of simple disorderly conduct and agrees to civil restitution regarding the property dispute at 4th and Main, specifically signing over the easement rights to the developers, the state will recommend time served and immediate release." Reed smiled at the cameras. He looked like a benevolent king granting pardon to a peasant. "We just want the city to move forward, Your Honor." Holloway turned to the defense table. "You hear that, Miss Jenkins? That is a gift, a literal gift. I assume your client accepts." Sarah stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she looked at Marcus, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly before finding its strength, "the defense rejects the plea." The room went silent. Reed's smile faltered. Holloway leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" Holloway spat. "Ms. Jenkins, I don't think you heard the prosecutor. He is offering your client freedom. If you go to trial, I promise you, I will throw the book at him." "We are not going to trial, Your Honor," Sarah said, picking up a document, "and we are not accepting the plea. Instead, the defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all charges with prejudice, and—" She took a deep breath. "We are filing a formal motion for the immediate recusal of Judge Arthur Holloway and the disqualification of District Attorney Gavin Reed." Laughter broke out from the prosecution table. Reed actually chuckled aloud. "On what grounds, Ms. Jenkins? Did you learn a new word in law school?" Sarah didn't flinch this time. She walked to the center of the courtroom. "On the grounds of State Statute 19B, Sarah declared, her voice ringing clear, "and on the grounds of criminal conspiracy, extortion, and fraud." Holloway's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Bailiff! Take her into custody for contempt! This is a circus!" "If you arrest me," Sarah shouted over the commotion, "you will only add to the count of the indictment. We have evidence that this court and the prosecutor's office conspired to falsely arrest the defendant for the specific purpose of coercing a real estate transaction regarding the Vanguard Holdings property." "That is a lie," Reed shouted, standing up. "This is slander." "Is it?" Sarah turned to the gallery. "We have requested the dash cam footage, which shows no assault occurred. But more importantly, Your Honor, you failed to check who the trustee of Vanguard Holdings is." Holloway froze. The gavel hovered in his hand. A cold seed of dread planted itself in his stomach. "The defendant," Sarah pointed at Marcus, "is not just a property owner. He is the registered trustee for the State Judicial Oversight Committee." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having just been armed. Reed's face went pale. He looked at Marcus. Marcus wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking directly at Holloway, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of the executioner. "Mr. Vance?" Holloway stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. Marcus slowly stood up. The handcuffs clinked. "Ms. Jenkins is doing an excellent job," Marcus said, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. but she missed one minor detail. Marcus looked at the bailiff. "Officer, would you please remove these cuffs? I believe you are currently detaining a federal officer." The bailiff looked at Holloway. Holloway was paralyzed. "Do it," Holloway whispered, terrified. The bailiff unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists. He reached into his jacket pocket, which had been returned to him before court, and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold badge of the state Supreme Court glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Arthur Holloway," Marcus said, his voice booming. "Gavin Reed, you are not hearing a case today. You are the case." This is entrapment," Reed shrieked. "No, Mr. Reed," Marcus said calmly, walking toward the bench. "Entrapment is forcing you to commit a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit. I simply stood on a sidewalk. You did the rest. You kidnapped me. You beat me. You attempted to extort me. And you did it all on the record." Marcus turned to the back of the room. "Agent Miller, are you ready?" From the back row of the gallery, two men in dark suits stood up. They weren't reporters. They were State Bureau of Investigation agents. They had been sitting there the whole time. "We're ready, Mr. Vance," one of them said. Marcus turned back to the judge. "Judge Holloway, get off my bench. You're under arrest." The chaos in courtroom 4B was absolute. It wasn't the noisy chaos of a riot, but the terrifying, high-stakes chaos of a regime collapsing in real time. Flashbulbs from the few press members present went off like strobes, capturing the image that would end 2 careers. Judge Arthur Holloway, purple-faced and sputtering, being hauled out of his high-backed leather chair by state agents. "Get your hands off me!" Holloway screamed, his voice cracking. "I am a judge of the Superior Court. I have immunity. This is a coup." "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Miller said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. He spun Holloway around and slammed him against the polished wood of the bench, the very altar Holloway had defiled for years. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." Gavin Reed, the golden boy, had lost his shark-like composure. He was backing away toward the heavy oak doors, his eyes darting around for an exit. "Marcus," Reed pleaded, holding his hands up. "Mr. Vance, please, I was just following procedure. Holloway made me do it. I can cut a deal. I have files on the mayor. I have files on the police chief." Marcus Vance stood in the center of the storm, an island of calm. He adjusted his cuffs, smoothing the wrinkles in his cheap suit. He looked at Reed with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You're already trying to plea bargain, Gavin?" Marcus asked, his voice low but audible. "You haven't even been booked yet. Save it for your public defender." "I don't use public defenders," Reed spat, panic overriding his sense. "I'm Gavin Reed." "Your assets were frozen 10 minutes ago," Marcus said, checking his watch. "RICO statutes are swift. You and Holloway are being charged under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You don't have a dime to your name right now." Reed's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the prosecution table, knocking over a pitcher of water. The water spilled over his expensive Italian suit, soaking the crotch, making it look like he had wet himself. The cameras caught that too. Sarah Jenkins stood by her desk, clutching her files to her chest. She felt like she was in a dream. She watched as the bailiff, the same one who had sneered at Marcus earlier, hesitantly stepped aside to let the SBI agents pass. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. "Ms. Jenkins," Marcus said, turning to her. Sarah jumped. "Yes, Mr. Vance? Or Mr. Chairman?" "Marcus is fine," he said gently. "I need you to do one more thing for me as my counsel before I formally discharge you. Anything. I need you to file a motion to preserve all evidence in the clerk's office," Marcus said. Holloway has a shredder in his chambers. I suspect his secretary is trying to use it right now. The SBI is heading there, but I want the legal paper trail to be bulletproof." "Consider it done," Sarah said, a newfound confidence straightening her spine. She wasn't just a burnt-out public defender anymore. She was the attorney of record who had just taken down the king. As Holloway was dragged past Marcus in cuffs, he stopped struggling for a moment. He looked at the black man he had tried to crush. "Who sent you?" Holloway hissed. "Was it the governor?" Marcus leaned in close, so only Holloway could hear. "No one sent me, Arthur. I came because I read the letters. The letters from the mothers of the boys you sent away for 20 years for first-time offenses. The letters from the homeowners you evicted to help your developer friends. You thought they were trash. I thought they were evidence." Holloway paled. I can fix this. We can work something out." "You're going to jail, Arthur," Marcus whispered. "And the worst part? You're going to the same jail you sent them to. You're going to be in general population with the men whose lives you stole." Holloway screamed as they dragged him out the door. The sound echoed down the marble hallway, a ghostly wail that marked the end of an era. 3 days later, the county jail. Arthur Holloway sat on the bottom bunk of a cell that was significantly smaller than his bathroom at the country club. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that chafed his skin. The air smelled of mold and unwashed bodies. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the men in the cafeteria. They knew who he was. Word traveled fast inside. The hanging judge was now just inmate 8940. "Yo, Holloway!" a voice shouted from the cell across the catwalk. "You remember me? Sentenced me to 10 years for a busted taillight and a joint. I'm getting out next week on appeal thanks to your little scandal. You want my leftovers?" A wet piece of bread flew through the bars and hit Holloway in the chest. Holloway scrambled back, pressing himself against the cold cinder block wall. "Guard! Guard! I need protective custody. I am a high-profile target." A deputy walked by. It was Griggs, the same deputy who had threatened Marcus. But Griggs didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked terrified. He knew the internal investigation was coming for him next. "Shut up, Holloway," Griggs muttered, not even stopping. "PC is full. You're in Gen Pop." "I'll have your badge," Holloway shrieked. "I have friends." "You ain't got no friends," a voice said from the cell door. Holloway looked up. Standing there was Gavin Reed. But Reed looked broken. His hair was greasy, his face bruised. He had been placed in the cell next door. "Gavin," Holloway whispered. "Gavin, you have to get hold of Sterling, the developer. He has the slush fund." Reed laughed, a manic, broken sound. "Sterling turned state's evidence yesterday, Arthur. He gave them everything. The ledger, the offshore accounts, the bribes. He threw us to the wolves to save his own skin." Holloway felt his heart stop. "The ledger?" "Everything," Reed cried, sliding down the wall of his cell. "They know about the bribes from the construction unions. They know about the kickbacks from the private prison contracts. They even know about the time you buried the DUI charge for the senator's son." "We need a lawyer," Holloway stammered. "A real lawyer, not these public defenders." "That's the best part," Reed said, wiping snot from his nose. "Since our assets are frozen, we don't qualify for private counsel. I just met my lawyer." "Who?" "Some kid named Martinez. He's been a lawyer for 3 months. He has 300 cases." Reed looked at Holloway with dead eyes. "He told me to take a plea." The irony hit Holloway like a physical blow. The machine he had built, the grinder designed to chew up the poor and the defenseless, was now chewing him. He was trapped in the belly of his own beast. Later that afternoon, the cell door opened. Holloway expected a beating. Instead, he saw Marcus Vance. Marcus was back in his own clothes, a sharp navy blue suit that screamed authority. He stood in the corridor, flanked by the warden, who looked nervous. "Mr. Vance," the warden said, "you shouldn't be down here. It's a security risk." "I'll be fine, Warden," Marcus said calmly. "I just wanted to check on the conditions of the facility, since I'll be overseeing the restructuring of the district's judicial system." Marcus looked into the cell. Holloway scrambled up to the bars. "Marcus." "Mr. Vance," Holloway begged. "Please, I'm an old man. I can't survive in here. These animals, they'll kill me." "Animals?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "These are the citizens you were sworn to serve. If they are animals, Arthur, it is because you treated them like livestock." "I was just doing what the system demanded," Holloway cried. "I was tough on crime." "No," Marcus said softly. "You were a criminal in a robe. You perverted the law for profit." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it through the bars. "What is this?" Holloway asked, his hands trembling. "That is a copy of the plea deal the state is offering you," Marcus said. "I advised the new district attorney on the terms." Holloway unfolded it. His eyes widened. 20 years. No parole. Forfeiture of all assets and pension. 20 years? Holloway gasped. "That's a death sentence at my age." "It's the same sentence you gave to a 19-year-old boy for selling weed 3 years ago," Marcus said coldly. "His name was Jamal. He died in a prison fight last month. I thought the symmetry was appropriate." Marcus turned to walk away. "Wait!" Holloway screamed. "I'll fight it. I'll go to trial." Marcus stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "I hope you do, Arthur. Sarah Jenkins is the lead prosecutor on your case. She's very motivated, and I'll be testifying." Marcus walked away, the sound of his dress shoes clicking on the concrete floor. Behind him, Holloway sank to the floor, sobbing into his hands. 6 months had passed since the day Judge Arthur Holloway was dragged from his bench in handcuffs, but the scars on the 4th District were still fresh. The trial of State versus Holloway, Reed et al., had become more than just a legal proceeding. It was a national spectacle. The courthouse, once a fortress of quiet corruption, was now surrounded daily by news vans, protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for the Innocent," and former defendants who had returned to watch their tormentors face the music. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was electric. The room had been renovated, literally and metaphorically. The dim, yellowed lighting had been replaced with bright LEDs, and the oppressive smell of stale coffee was gone. But the biggest change was the bench. The high-backed leather chair, worn into the shape of Holloway's sloth, was gone. In its place sat Chief Justice Elena Moore of the State Supreme Court, a woman known for her intellect and her absolute intolerance for ethical violations. The gallery was packed to capacity. In the front row sat the Mothers of the Fourth, a group of women whose sons had been given maximum sentences by Holloway for minor infractions. They sat in silent vigil, wearing white. At the prosecution table stood Sarah Jenkins. She was unrecognizable from the frazzled, terrified public defender of 6 months ago. She wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun, and her posture was that of a predator who had cornered its prey. She had been appointed as the special prosecutor for this case, a move orchestrated by Marcus Vance to ensure that the Old Boys Club couldn't protect their own. At the defense table, separated by 3 empty chairs, sat Arthur Holloway and Gavin Reed. They looked like ghosts. Holloway had lost nearly 60 pounds. His skin hung loosely on his frame, grey and papery. The arrogance that had defined his existence was replaced by a twitchy, paranoid terror. He refused to look at the gallery. He stared at his hands, which were trembling uncontrollably. Gavin Reed was worse. The golden boy had cracked under the pressure of pre-trial confinement. His hair was thinning, his eyes were bloodshot, and he muttered constantly to himself. He had tried to cut a deal 3 times, offering to testify against Holloway, but Sarah Jenkins had rejected every offer. She didn't need his testimony. She had the tapes. "Is the jury ready?" Justice Moore asked, her voice calm but commanding. "They are, Your Honor," the bailiff replied. The door to the jury room opened. 12 citizens walked in. Unlike the juries Holloway used to hand-pick, usually composed of retirees and friends of the police force, this jury was a true cross-section of the city. There was a schoolteacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a construction worker. They looked tired but resolute. Marcus Vance sat in the first row behind the prosecution, watching. He was dressed in his standard grey suit, his face unreadable. He wasn't there to gloat, he was there to witness. "Please stand," the justice ordered. Holloway struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the table. Reed stood up quickly, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Mr. Foreman," Justice Moore said, "has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreman, a tall man who worked at the local steel mill, replied. He didn't look at the defendants. He looked straight at the judge. "On count 1, racketeering and corruption under the RICO Act, how do you find the defendant, Arthur P. Holloway?" The room held its breath. The silence was so heavy, it felt like physical pressure. "Guilty," the foreman said. A collective exhale rushed through the room, a sound like wind moving through trees. Holloway flinched as if he'd been slapped. "On count 2, conspiracy to deprive civil rights," the justice continued. "Guilty." On count 3, extortion. Guilty. On count 4, false imprisonment. Guilty. The list went on. 19 counts in total. 19 times the word guilty rang out like a bell tolling for a funeral. With every count, Holloway sank lower, his physical stature collapsing along with his life. Then came Gavin Reed. "On the charge of prosecutorial misconduct and suborning perjury, how do you find the defendant, Gavin Reed?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit extortion?" "Guilty." When the final verdict was read, Gavin Reed let out a sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the pathetic whimper of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. Justice Moore nodded slowly. "The jury is thanked for their service. You are dismissed." As the jurors filed out, Justice Moore turned her gaze to the defendants. It was a look that could freeze water. "In 30 years on the bench," she began, her voice low, resonating through the microphone, "I have seen murderers, rapists, and terrorists. I have looked into the eyes of men who killed for fun. But I have never seen a more profound betrayal of the public trust than what has been presented in this courtroom." She picked up the sentencing file. "Arthur Holloway, you treated this court as your personal ATM. You sold the liberty of human beings for real estate deals and country club memberships. You didn't just break the law, you poisoned it. You made the people of this district fear the very institution designed to protect them." Holloway tried to speak. "Your Honor, I am an old man." "So was Mr. Henderson." Justice Moore cut him off sharply, referencing a witness from the trial, an elderly man Holloway had evicted illegally to help a donor. "Mr. Henderson died in a homeless shelter because of your ruling. You will find no sympathy here." She slammed the file closed. "Arthur P. Holloway, I sentence you to 25 years in the state penitentiary. Given the nature of your crimes, abuse of power against the populace, you are ineligible for protective custody. You will serve your time in general population." Holloway let out a strangled scream. "You can't! They'll kill me! I put them there!" "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you filled the prison with men who didn't belong there," Moore said coldly. "Bailiff, take him into custody." "And Mr. Reed," she turned to the younger man, "you had a duty to seek justice, not convictions. You are sentenced to 15 years, and I am recommending to the Bar Association that you be permanently disbarred. You will never set foot in a courtroom again, unless you are wearing handcuffs." The gavel came down. Bang! The sound was final. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut on a dark chapter of history. As the bailiffs moved in, the gallery erupted. It wasn't cheering, it was applause. Slow, steady, rhythmic applause. The mothers of the Fourth stood up, tears streaming down their faces, clapping for the end of their nightmare. Halloway was dragged out, his feet dragging on the floor, weeping openly. Reed followed, head hung low. Marcus Vance stood up and buttoned his jacket. He turned to Sarah Jenkins, who was packing her briefcase with trembling hands. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of relief. "We did it," she whispered. "No," Marcus corrected her gently. "You did it. I just opened the door. You walked through it." "What happens to them now?" Sarah asked, watching the empty doorway where the defendants had vanished. "Now," Marcus said, "they experience the reality they created." 2 hours later, Arthur Halloway was stripped of his suit. He was forced to squat and cough while a guard, a young man who didn't know or care who Halloway used to be, searched him for contraband. He was handed a jumpsuit that was too large and smelled of industrial detergent and sweat. He was shackled, waist and ankles, and loaded onto a transport bus. As he shuffled down the aisle of the bus, the other prisoners looked at him. These weren't the low-level offenders from the county jail. These were long-timers, hardened men. "Hey," a voice hissed from the back of the bus. "Ain't that Judge Halloway?" Halloway froze. He tried to make himself small. "It is." Another voice laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "Yo, Judge, remember me? You gave me 15 years for robbery in the 2nd degree. My lawyer asked for 5. You said you wanted to make an example out of me." "I remember him," a heavy-set man with tattoos on his face growled. "He denied my appeal without even reading it." Halloway began to hyperventilate. The bus engine roared to life. It was a 4-hour drive to the maximum security facility. For Arthur Halloway, it would be the longest 4 hours of his life. The hell he had built for others was now his permanent address. A week later, the sun was shining on the corner of 4th and Main, the disputed land that had started it all. The construction fences for the luxury condos were gone. The Vanguard Holdings sign was also gone. In its place, a new sign was being erected by a crew of workers. The Vance and Jenkins Legal Aid Center, equal justice for all. Pro bono services. Marcus Vance stood on the sidewalk, watching the sign go up. Sarah Jenkins stood next to him, holding 2 coffees. "I still can't believe you donated the land," Sarah said, shaking her head. "That lot is worth $4 million. "It was never about the money," Marcus said, taking a sip of coffee. "That land was bait. Now that the rats are caught, the trap doesn't need to exist anymore. But this community needs something permanent. They need to know that if they walk into a courtroom, they have a fighting chance." "I resigned from the public defender's office this morning," Sarah announced. Marcus turned to her, feigning surprise. "Oh, and what are you going to do?" "Well," Sarah smiled, pointing at the sign, "I hear the director of this new legal aid center is looking for a partner, someone who knows how to fight." Marcus smiled, that rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I think you're overqualified, but the job is yours if you want it." "I want it," Sarah said firmly. They watched as a group of people approached the unfinished building. It was the mothers of the fourth. They weren't wearing white mourning clothes today. They were wearing bright colors. They brought pies, flowers, and cards. They came to thank the man who had listened when no one else would. One of the women, an elderly matriarch named Mrs. Higgins, walked up to Marcus. She reached up and cupped his face with her weathered hands. "They said you were just a troublemaking lawyer," she said softly. "I've been called worse," Marcus chuckled. "You're an angel, that's what you are," she said. "You gave me my son back. His case is under review. He's coming home." Marcus took her hands. "That wasn't me, Mrs. Higgins. That was the law finally working the way it's supposed to. Maybe," she patted his cheek, "but the law needs good hands to hold it." Marcus looked over the crowd, then at the building rising behind him. He thought of Holloway in his cell, realizing that power isn't about how many people you can crush, but how many you can lift up. The corruption was a weed, deep and tangled, but they had pulled it out by the root. And here, on this corner, something new was finally growing. "Ready to get to work, partner?" Marcus asked Sarah. Sarah adjusted her bag, looking at the line of people already waiting for help. "I'm ready," she said. Together they walked toward the entrance of the center, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them, walking into a future where justice wasn't just a word, but a promise kept. And that is how the corrupt empire of Judge Holloway and Prosecutor Reed came crashing down. They thought they were the predators, but they forgot that in the jungle of justice, there is always a bigger lion. Marcus Vance didn't just beat them, he used their own arrogance to destroy them, proving that no one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story about karma hitting back hard. What did you think of the sentence? Was 25 years enough for Holloway? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next court session.